Hello, everyone. Welcome to session number 6 on manuscript production through an editor's lens. My name is Urvashi. I teach at IIT Delhi, research writing and academic writing, in addition to remedial English and language to undergraduates. The research writing and academic writing that I teach is to PhD students and PhD candidates. I have about 4 to 5 years of experience teaching academic writing and research writing to a variety of students across universities, including Delhi University. I have a PhD in English Language and Literature from University College London, and I am very pleased to be presenting this session to you because I have been wanting a platform to be able to consolidate the things that I think are most important about research writing for a very long time. And this session and the topic that we have been given for this session is uniquely positioned, uniquely phrased to allow me to do that. Manuscript writing through an editor's lens, which basically means you are required to get out of your role as a writer and a researcher and look at your writing from the perspective of someone who's preparing it for publication, which means they have an eye to your audience. They have an eye to readability. They have an eye to whether or not your piece is entirely communicative. And that is something that we don't very often, we don't think about when we're writing. The reason for this is that writing can be divided up into two kinds, essentially. Formal and informal, that's one kind of binary division when you're dividing up writing into two types of writing, formal and informal, for example. And you will note that academic writing and research writing will, of course, almost always fall into the formal category. But more importantly, at least for the purposes of thinking about manuscript production from an editor's lens, is the distinction between writing for expression, self-expression, and writing for communication. When we're writing for expression, for self-expression, we're not actually paying attention to who the audience is. We are focused on what it is we want to express and how we want to express it, rather than how other people are going to understand it. And the editor's lens switches our perspective entirely to the other type of writing, communicative writing. The editor is focused on how well your writing is communicating with your audience. And taking on that persona, adopting that lens, can be extremely helpful to producing writing that is not only good to read to you or to people who know your work or people who are familiar at least with the field, but to making it actively publishable and readable by a wide variety of audiences. So that that lens allows us to think about research writing in a completely different way, approach it from a completely different direction, which means also that we are approaching all of research writing and all aspects of research writing in this one session. We have the opportunity to do that. So that is what I'm going to be doing with you. And I hope that a lot of these things will be familiar to you, partly familiar to you, or extensively familiar to you, depending on how much writing you have been doing and how much you like writing, really. And some of the things might be either new, or they may be ways of thinking about things differently than you have been used to or than you have yourself done. And that too can be very, very useful. Just approaching things from a different perspective, thinking about things in different words, thinking about things from somebody else's point of view, or the way that somebody else puts it, which is another thing that is very often a very important part of the sessions that I usually host for research writing, which is the reminder that I am not actually teaching you. What I am doing is simply refreshing a lot of the knowledge that you already have. You are all academics, and you are all, to varying degrees, very, very adept at academic writing. You have been doing it for decades, regardless of where you are in your, say, your PhD journey. So this is all stuff that you know in one way or another. It's simply that you may not have thought about it in a consolidated kind of way. And also, my way of talking about it and my way of situating different aspects of it, you may find that helpful to doing something similar for yourself. So those are the aims of this session. Basically, getting you to think about writing in a couple of 2 or 3 different kinds of ways. Your own writing, and also other people's writing, the writing that you read, the literature that you're going to review. That too, you will be able to approach it differently because you are thinking about it as an editor rather than as a student or a reader, merely as a student or reader. And by approaching it as an editor, through an editor's lens, you may be better positioned to evaluate it, better positioned to review it as well. So this session should technically help you to write better as well as to read better, as well as to just get you thinking about reading and writing in general. So without further... one more thing that I want to say before I start off is I'm going to be using flashcards, not a PowerPoint presentation. The reason for that is that in my experience, when you have access to a PowerPoint presentation that gives you all the keywords for a particular session, you tend generally not to actually watch. You generally tend not to participate in the session. Even if it's a recording, you're still participating when you're listening, because it's like a lecture. You may be taking notes. You may be thinking about the ways in which I'm putting things while I'm putting them. You're processing information differently when I'm speaking, as opposed to simply when you're reading. And reading you can do on your own. There are plenty of research writing books on research writing, websites on research writing, which you could go to and browse on your own. There would be no need for this session if it weren't for the fact that I'm going to say things differently. And if I'm using a PowerPoint presentation as well, I tend to stick to precisely what is on the PowerPoint presentation, which means that I can't interject, I can't talk about things, put them in different kinds of ways, experiment with a variety of ways of saying something that I want to say. And generally speaking, the entire experience becomes quite inflexible on both ends, your end as well as my end. So I'm going to be using flashcards, which you will be able to see, and you will, once you've gone through the session. I've told you this in advance also because you can note when it is that I'm using a flashcard, so that you can later on, if you want to look at the flashcards, you'll know at what timestamp those will be available to you. Everything that's on the flashcards I'm going to also say, but I'm also going to put things differently, as I've said before. And the flashcards are going to include keywords as well as a couple of resources, 2 or 3 resources that I think are helpful for you to start off. Just go forth in your writing. Other than that, that's basically all. Okay, so I'm going to now start the session. Okay, so I'm going to be looking at research writing through manuscript production through an editor's lens in 2 different kinds of ways. One is the technical aspects of it, and the second will be addressing authorial biases. We'll get to that. We'll get to why it is that authorial biases is important, is something that's very important, a significant aspect of looking at manuscript writing. Really from a reviewer's lens as well as from an editor's lens. And either of those two people, reviewers and editors, matter a lot to what it is that you write and when you want to publish especially. So I'll discuss that later. The technical aspect is what will hopefully get you into the groove, in the sense that you know all this and you'll be familiar with this and you will immediately recognize it and you will know what it is we're talking about. When we're talking about manuscript production from an editor's lens, what we're looking at first and foremost is grammar and syntax. Grammar and syntax is about producing correct language. For those of you for whom English is a second language, or English is a language that you don't particularly like thinking in or reading in or writing in or speaking in, it's not really your choice of language of communication. The production of writing in the English language can be extremely challenging. Similarly, if you are required to produce your work in a different language, which is unfamiliar to you or which you don't particularly like reading in or writing in or communicating in, then the production of your work can have a particular set of challenges for you. Other than that, also for all of us so-called either native speakers or very fluent speakers and writers and readers of any particular language, when we sit down to do academic writing, the attention to detail of grammatical detail that is required for the production of academic writing is a whole other level. And regardless of how good you are, you need some kind of support. So if you are pretty confident that your grammar is okay, then something like the editor of Microsoft Word or of Google Docs or of Grammarly, an app like Grammarly, can be extremely helpful for simply correcting grammar. It's not advisable to stick just to AI for correction of anything. This will apply to every single thing that I say, but let's start with grammar. It's not advisable to stick to AI for correcting your grammar because AI is not all that advanced yet. It's pretty good, but not foolproof. And secondly, because the one thing that AI misses is variation. And a variation is the lifeblood of your writing. Once you know grammar, you start to break the rules. That's the way that we write better, is by playing with the rules, rules of grammar, so-called rules of grammar. And that is what adds spice, life, vitality to your writing, and it adds to the voice of your writing, for which there are no shortcuts. You have to have the rules of grammar down, plus you need to do a lot of reading. The only real way in which you can be fairly certain that you are using correct grammar is when you do a lot of reading. Do a lot of reading in that particular field. Do a lot of reading just around your own work. Good writers. And that is the only way that you can get your grammar right. After the point of you already know grammar. And that point you have to achieve anyway, first. Same goes for syntax. It's even more true for syntax. Syntax is sentence structure. How do you structure a particular sentence? Where does the noun go? Where does the verb go? Where does an adverb go? What is the ordering of different types of adjectives? These are all things that a native speaker pretty much knows instinctively by the time that they're adults of any language. Second, people for whom the language that they're writing, doing academic writing in, is a second language or not really a native language, this is a little harder, but it is something that you will emulate or simulate. You'll copy it or reproduce it from the writing that you do almost automatically, and you will begin to do it more and more. Now, the thing to remember about grammar and syntax is you get it right. The reading matters if you are actually reading good stuff. So this is where reliable sources are a very important thing to remember. When you're thinking about producing your own manuscript, when you're doing your own writing, you should be surrounded by good writing. You should be surrounded by good writing in the sense that not just the material is good, but the writing itself is grammatically and syntactically correct. It uses correct grammar and syntax, which means no Wikipedia, no unreliable sources, no blog posts. I mean, not no blog posts or no slightly unreliable sources, but you have to be confident about being able to judge the kind of language that you're reading in order to be able to be reproduced. And you will be reproducing aspects of syntax and grammar from what you read automatically. You can't help it. Which is why later on when we talk about citation, this is why plagiarism, avoiding plagiarism is something that we are always very anxious about. It's because we do a lot of writing and then we realize that there are particular phrases or particular syntactic structures that we borrowed from elsewhere without even realizing that we have done so. All of which is to say, and then we have to modulate that. We have to be aware of it, make ourselves aware of the fact that we are going to be reproducing other people's syntactic patterns, and make a point of varying them, make a point of paraphrasing, make a point of rewriting, make a point of revising our writing after we've done it in order to avoid plagiarism. But all of which is to say that you are going to automatically and inevitably reproduce grammar and syntax from what you're reading. So you need to be reading good grammar and syntax. And that is the first thing that an editor is looking for. Is this grammatically correct, or am I going to have to pay a proofreader to just correct capitalizations, tenses, whether something is plural or singular? Those are things that you absolutely do not want your manuscript to go to an editor with those errors. You don't want your manuscript to get to an editor with those errors. So those are the most basic thing that you have to avoid. The second thing that you want to be avoiding that you want to be paying attention to is vocabulary and jargon. Here, vocabulary and jargon. When I'm talking about vocabulary and jargon, I'm talking about the word choices. One aspect of it is lay word choices. So when I use the word articulate rather than express, why am I doing it? Diction. Word choices, diction. Why am I saying using the word articulate rather than the word express. It means very similar things. They're synonyms for each other. But being able to pick which one of those two words is the more appropriate one to use in my own writing at a particular point is something that you will have to make yourself aware of. Because generally speaking, we tend to use quite a limited vocabulary that we use every day. So, and also when we're talking about particular subjects, particular issues, when we're talking within a particular frame, our vocabulary is pretty fixed. We reproduce the same words over and over again. And what you will find, for example, very often in your own writing is you will be reading your own writing and you'll see that you've used the same word 6 times in 2 pages. And that is something that you need to avoid. You will have to find synonyms for what it is you want to say, but at the same time, your synonyms have to be exact, precise, and the phrasing around synonyms has to be supportive of that synonym being used rather than the original word that you wanted to use. This kind of work that you want to do with vocabulary, a thesaurus is very, very helpful, but at the same time, do please remember to use an etymological dictionary. Etymology is the history of words, and that is what determines whether a particular synonym, the history of word use, is what determines whether a particular word may or may not be used, is appropriate in a particular setting. Because words are history. The way in which particular words have been used is what the meaning of a word is. So, an etymological dictionary, once again, you can simply Google them. All the major dictionary publishers also have etymological dictionaries. Several of them are available online. So while you're using thesauruses, also be using an etymological dictionary to see how has the word been used in the past. While we're on the subject of vocabulary, I also want to mention one resource, and I want to talk about one particular concept, collocation. The resource that I'm going to mention is called the Academic Collocation List. This word, collocation, number 3. Collocation refers to words that go together, that have historically gone together. So, for example, we say grave illness, chronic illness, acute illness. We don't say bad illness. The words bad and illness have not gone together. The adjective bad has not been applied to illness historically. Historically, chronic has been applied to illness. The adjective acute has been applied to the noun illness, and grave, the adjective grave has been applied to the noun illness, but bad illness is not what is said. So collocation is words that have been used together. The Academic Collocation List, and the website is there on the screen right now, eapfoundation.com/vocab/academic/ACL. The Academic Collocation List is a collection of about 2,500 academic collocations. Collocations, that words that appear together, that appear very often together in academic texts. And this is across the board. So the Academic Collocation List was developed by a researcher her area of research is research writing and academic writing, and she developed this list by going through, with the help of AI, going through academic books and seeing which words go together, which phrases appear very often. So, for example, I present rather than I write. I write about the color yellow in nature is something that you will see in a blog post, in informal writing, in a talk, in an informal setting, but you will not find that phrase in an academic text. In an academic text, you will find I present data on the color yellow in nature, for example. So, I present is an academic collocation. The reason that the academic collocation list is a useful resource is that it can act as an excellent booster for the reading that we're doing. It can help emphasize the collocations that we are aware of, but we may not have thought about applying to our own writing. Because very often the things that we're reading, the things that we're interested in, our fields of research, we are discussing them in class, we're discussing them with our mentors, with our supervisors, and so on and so forth. We are doing so using conversational phraseology and conversational collocation. We need to adjust that to an academic, formal way of putting those things. And that may not come automatically. So just going through the list gives us ideas for how it is we can express ourselves in more formal ways. Speaking of formality, there are two aspects of it that bear notice. One is the thing that I was talking about when I'm talking about vocabulary. I said one aspect of thinking about vocabulary is lay vocabulary, word choice, diction, general word choice and diction. The other aspect of it is jargon, vocabulary and jargon. We always put the two things together. So one is you're picking the more appropriate word, whether in lay terms, whether you want to use the word blue or you want to use the word cyan. But on the other hand, there is also jargon. The words which are specific to your field, which have very particular meanings depending on the context, the frame of your field of research. For example, the word population in the social sciences has very specific meanings. In the ecological sciences, population has very different meanings. When you're talking about population in the social sciences, you are almost always referring to human beings. When you are talking about populations in the ecological sciences, very often you are referring to populations of non-human animals. And that particular difference of jargon also becomes particularly relevant when a word that is in your field has a very specific meaning and it qualifies as jargon, but to a lay person, that word will mean something very different. This also happens surprisingly often